Okay, so chapter 20 is the progressive era, 1890 to 1920. So, what's this progressive era about? So, prior to the progressive era, you had what's called the Gilded Age. And the Gilded Age had laissez-faire economics. And laissez-faire economics was the idea that the government should let the economy alone. If you let the economy alone, you don't mess with business, you don't regulate business, you'll lead to great economic growth. And it does, it leads to great industrialization and economic growth, and there becomes this mentality of just let the economy alone, and to not regulate business. That's all well and good, except that there becomes a lot of problems with this economic growth. Number one, and this isn't in any particular order, but issues like child labor. If you don't regulate businesses, a lot of businesses would hire children. Lewis Hine did some famous photographs where he'd go into factories, and there's haunting photos of children working in factories. Or the breaker boys. These are children that had to work in coal mines. You'd have widespread pollution because it's not the government's business, and they could pollute. You had terrible working conditions where people could get hurt, but it cost money to make a safe working factory, and they could save money. And then you had people not making a living wage, and they'd have to work 15 hours a day. And this is the labor movement, labor unions. Eugene Debs saw that in that last assignment. There's so many problems now. A lot of that problems are related to growth too. Urbanization, crowded cities, disease, crime. There's so many problems out there. And the progressive era is like a 180. And the 180 is the government can fix these problems through regulation. They won't come about right away. But the progressive era has all these goals and all these things they set out to change to make better. And overall, it is a very successful movement. It includes so many things. Trying to end child labor, trying to provide a living wage for people, safe working conditions, fire and safety codes and regulations, clean water sanitation in the cities, also reforming government, more democracy in government, initiative petitions and recall elections in order to try to get out corruption within government. And they also had 4 amendments that the progressive era had passed. So that's pretty amazing. The 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th Amendments. Sorry, correction. Okay, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, those are the Civil War amendments. The 13th Amendment banned slavery, even though you continued to have sharecropping. The 14th Amendment, equal protection, even though you still had separate but equal. 15th Amendment, right to vote, that didn't happen either because of literacy test and poll taxes and grandfather clauses, but they were supposed to. After that, you get the progressive amendments. And the progressive amendments would include an income tax because government becomes much bigger and they need to pay for government, so they passed an income tax. It is a progressive income tax, which is the more you make, the more you pay. Of course, there's loopholes and everything like that, and that's another issue today, but they also had direct election of U.S. senators. U.S. senators used to be elected by state legislatures. Now we, the people, get to elect our U.S. senators. And the reason they previously had that was because the U.S. senators, there's just 2 from each state, is such an important position. The people who wrote the Constitution, the founding fathers, were like, no, we don't trust average people to make that decision. Well, the progressives are like, yeah, the people should be able to elect their senators. So you had the income tax, direct election of U.S. senators, and then prohibition. And they're like, we'll get rid of alcohol, and that'll solve all the problems. Didn't work out so well. That amendment, the only amendment, ironically, that was passed to restrict people's freedom, did not work and would be repealed. And then finally, the women's right to vote, women's suffrage, was also one of the accomplishments of the progressive era. So that's also mentioned in this chapter, and you'll see all of these things that the progressives are starting out to do. And a big part of the progressive movement too is Teddy Roosevelt. And so Teddy Roosevelt's, as we mentioned, I think last year, Spanish-American War, and he becomes president upon McKinley's assassination, and he's really the first progressive president. And progressivism really is part of both political parties by the time it's done. I mean, you had Roosevelt and then Taft and Wilson, a Democrat. Roosevelt and Taft were Republicans, but Wilson, a Democrat's also progressive, so it was pretty widespread and pretty popular at the time. And Roosevelt also championed another issue of progressivism, and that was early environmentalism, conservation, creation of the national parks. And they mentioned the election of 1912. Wow, what an election that was, because Teddy Roosevelt comes back and he runs against William Howard Taft. It splits the Republican Party. It splits that vote because Roosevelt formed his own political party, the Progressives or Bull Moose Party. That allows Wilson to become president. So tons of information in this chapter, a whole lot of things to think about, and they did accomplish a lot, but there's limitations too. The progressives really didn't do much about the racial issues. That was largely ignored, and so not a lot of progress is made in that respect. So, all right. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me, and we just keep plugging along.